Linda stood in front of her hallway mirror, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. Today was the day she had been dreaming of for years. Her only son, Mark, was getting married. She smoothed down the fabric of her dress, a soft, powder blue number she had spent weeks searching for. She had been incredibly careful with her choice. She knew mothers-in-law often got a bad reputation for trying to outshine the bride, so she made sure this dress was modest, simple, and elegant. It was clearly blue, a color that complemented the theme without taking any attention away from Chloe. As she looked at her reflection, her mind drifted to everything she had done to make this day perfect. It wasn't just emotional support, it was financial. Linda had poured her heart and her savings into this wedding. She had happily written the check for the deposit on the beautiful venue, a grand garden estate that cost a small fortune. But it didn't stop there. Without telling anyone, she had also been paying the monthly payments on Mark's car so he wouldn't have to worry about bills while planning the wedding. She had even secretly put down the security deposit on the newlyweds' apartment and paid the first 3 months of rent up front. She did it out of love, wanting to give them the smoothest start possible. She felt like a silent partner in their happiness, but as she grabbed her purse and headed out the door, she had no idea that today, she would become the villain in their story. The drive to the venue was filled with sunshine and high hopes. Linda parked her car and walked toward the grand entrance, smiling at the guests who were starting to arrive. She felt a swell of pride in her chest. She raised Mark on her own after his father passed away, and seeing him grow into a man who was ready to start his own family was her greatest achievement. She wanted to pop into the bridal suite quickly, wish Chloe luck, and maybe share a sweet moment with her son before the chaos of the ceremony began. When she reached the door of the bridal suite, she knocked gently. A bridesmaid she didn't know well opened the door, and the room instantly went silent. The air inside was thick with hairspray and tension. Linda stepped in with a warm smile, holding a small gift bag for Chloe. "Chloe, wow, you look absolutely stunning," Linda said, her voice full of genuine affection. Chloe turned around slowly. She looked like a princess in her white gown, but the expression on her face was anything but sweet. Her eyes narrowed as they scanned Linda from head to toe, landing on the blue dress. The room full of bridesmaids held their breath. "What are you wearing?" Chloe asked, her voice low and dangerous. Linda blinked, confused. "Oh, it's just a simple blue dress. I wanted to make sure I didn't clash with the bridesmaids." Blue. Chloe let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Linda, are you kidding me? That dress is white. It's white and gold." "You are wearing a wedding dress to my wedding." Linda felt the blood drain from her face. She looked down at herself. The dress was undeniably blue. It was the color of a summer sky. She held the fabric out towards the light coming from the window. "Chloe, no, look. It is blue. I promise you, I would never wear white. I bought it specifically at a different store just to be sure." "Don't gaslight me right now," Chloe snapped, her voice rising an octave. "This is exactly what I was worried about. You have to make everything about you. You couldn't just let me have one day where I'm the center of attention. You had to show up in a wedding gown." The bridesmaids started murmuring, giving Linda disapproving looks. Linda's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She looked past Chloe, hoping to see Mark. She spotted him in the corner of the room, adjusting his tie. Their eyes met. She pleaded with him silently, "Mark, tell her. Tell her it's blue. Tell her I wouldn't do that." But Mark just looked down at his shoes. "Mark," Linda said, her voice trembling slightly. Please, tell her. You saw me leave the house. You know this dress is blue. Mark shifted uncomfortably. He walked over to Chloe and put a protective arm around her waist, but he didn't look at his mother. Mom, I think you should just go, he mumbled. Excuse me, Linda asked, stunned. You want me to go, Mark? I'm your mother. I paid for this venue. I paid for the flowers. I'm the reason we are standing in this room right now. Chloe let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. It seemed theatrical, but everyone in the room bought it. See, she's doing it again. She's trying to ruin my day with her guilt and her money. I can't get married like this. I can't walk down the aisle knowing she's out there mocking me. Mom, please, Mark said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold. You're causing a scene. Chloe is hysterical. If you stay, the wedding is off. You need to leave. Now. Linda felt like she had been slapped. The room was spinning. This wasn't just a misunderstanding about a color, this was a calculated move. Chloe was using her as a scapegoat, and Mark was letting it happen. He was choosing a petty argument over his own mother. Mark, Linda whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I raised you. I did everything for you. Please don't do this. Security is coming to escort you out, Mark said flatly, turning his back on her. A few minutes later, a large security guard appeared at the door. He didn't look angry, just awkward. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property. Linda looked around the room at the young women staring at her with judgment. She looked at the back of her son's head. She realized then that she had lost. If she stayed, she would ruin the wedding, and she would never be forgiven. If she left, she was humiliated, but at least her son would get married. With her head held high but her heart broken into 1,000 pieces, Linda turned and walked out. The walk to her car felt like the longest walk of her life. She could hear the music starting inside as she sat in the driver's seat. She watched through blurred vision as the guests were seated. She was parked just rows away from the entrance, close enough to see the happiness she wasn't allowed to be part of. She sat there for 10 minutes, praying her phone would buzz. Surely, Mark would come out. Surely, once the drama died down, he would realize how ridiculous this was and come get her. She picked up her phone to check for messages. Nothing. Then, a single text popped up. It was from Mark. Mom, please just go home. We can't have drama today. Chloe is the priority right now. I'll call you when we get back from the honeymoon. Do not come back. Linda stared at the screen until the words blurred. She put the key in the ignition and started the car, pulling away from the venue where she had poured thousands of dollars and years of love. As she drove away, the anger began to replace the sadness. She had been kicked out of the wedding she paid for, by a son she supported. And if they thought they could treat her like garbage and still cash her checks, they had another thing coming. Linda wiped her tears and gripped the steering wheel tighter. She was done being the bank account for people who didn't respect her. This wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning of theirs having to survive without her. The drive back to Linda's house felt like a movie scene where the main character is floating in a bubble, disconnected from the rest of the world. The streets were busy, people were laughing in other cars, and the sun was still shining brightly, but inside Linda's vehicle, the atmosphere was heavy and gray. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes stinging from tears that she refused to let fall while she was driving. Every few miles, she would glance at her phone resting on the passenger seat, hoping to see a notification. Maybe Mark would call. Maybe he would come to his senses and realize how insane Chloe was acting. Maybe he would chase after her car. But the screen remained black. The silence was louder than any scream she could have mustered. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the reality of the situation crashed down on her. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For months, her home had been filled with wedding planning chatter, fabric samples, and the excitement of her son getting married. Now, it was just an empty house with a mother who had just been exiled from her only child's life. Linda walked into the house and didn't even bother turning on the lights. She walked straight to her bedroom and caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The blue dress, the one that had caused so much trouble, still looked powder blue in the soft light of her room. It was beautiful, modest, and elegant. It was not white. She wasn't crazy. She knew she wasn't crazy. But somehow, she had been painted as the villain. With shaking hands, she unzipped the dress and let it fall to the floor. She stepped out of it and left it in a pile on the floor, like a shed skin she couldn't wait to get rid of. She put on her old, comfortable sweatpants and a t-shirt, feeling a strange mix of relief and deep, aching sorrow. She went to the kitchen to make some tea, trying to establish some sort of routine to calm her racing heart. As the water boiled, she sat at the kitchen table and stared at the clock. By now, the ceremony was over. They were probably saying their vows. Mark would be looking into Chloe's eyes, promising to love and cherish her, while his mother sat at home in her sweatpants, drinking tea alone. It felt surreal. It felt like a bad dream that she would wake up from any minute. Suddenly, her phone pinged. Linda grabbed it so fast she nearly knocked over her tea. It wasn't Mark. It was a notification from social media. Friends and family who were at the wedding were posting photos. Linda's thumb hovered over the screen, terrified to look but unable to stop herself. She scrolled through the feed. There was a photo of the venue, the beautiful flowers she had paid for, and the archway she had helped design. Then, she saw a photo of the happy couple. Mark looked handsome, but Linda noticed something: his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked tired. Chloe, however, was beaming, looking triumphant. The caption read, "Finally married to my best friend. No drama, just love." That sentence felt like a slap in the face. No drama. Linda's heart sank. They were framing her as the drama. Linda's phone started buzzing with calls and texts from relatives. "Aunt Linda, where are you? We saved you a seat." "Hey, I thought you were walking in with Mark. Is everything okay?" Linda didn't know what to say. How could she tell them that her own son had kicked her out because of a dress color? How could she explain that her son had chosen his bride's temper tantrum over his own mother? It was too humiliating. She typed out a generic reply to her cousin, "I wasn't feeling well suddenly. Decided to come home and rest. Have a wonderful time." It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. The evening dragged on painfully. Linda sat on the couch, watching the hours tick by. She imagined the reception starting. The first dance. The toast. She had written a speech for the toast. It was in her purse right now, full of memories of Mark as a little boy and wishes for his future. She pulled the crumpled piece of paper out of her bag and read it through tear-filled eyes. It was a beautiful speech. A speech about unconditional love. She bitterly laughed and threw it into the fireplace. Clearly, her love wasn't unconditional enough for Mark, or at least, it wasn't as important as keeping Chloe happy. 3 days passed. The silence from Mark was deafening. There were no texts. No calls. Not even a message saying, "Mom, I'm sorry," but Chloe was stressed. It was just, nothing. Linda watched from afar as they posted photos from their honeymoon at a luxury beach resort. She remembered that she had bought them that honeymoon package as a gift. She had paid for the flight and the upgrades to the oceanfront villa. They were sipping champagne that she had paid for, enjoying the sand and sun, while acting as if she didn't exist. It was during this time that the sadness in Linda's heart began to harden into something else, anger. Not just the hot anger of the moment, but a cold, settling realization. She looked around her house. She had dipped into her retirement fund to pay for that wedding. She had worked overtime shifts to pay for the deposit on their apartment. She had skipped her own vacations and driven an old car so that Mark could have a new one. And for what to be treated like a stranger on the fourth day after the wedding, Linda was going through her mail. Most of it was bills and junk, but one envelope stood out. It was from the apartment complex where Mark and Chloe were moving into after their honeymoon. It was a confirmation letter for the lease setup, but it also included a notice about the automatic rent payment schedule. Linda stared at the paper. She had set up an automatic transfer from her account to cover the rent for the first year, as a wedding gift to give them time to save for a house. She looked at the amount. It was significant. It was money she could barely afford, but she had done it because she loved him. But now, the image of Mark's cold back at the venue flashed in her mind. She remembered him telling her that Chloe was the priority. Linda walked over to her desk and opened her laptop. She logged into her bank account. She saw the list of automatic payments she had set up for her son. There was the car insurance payment of $200 a month, the car lease payment of $400 a month, the rent payment of $2,000 a month, and the money she had been sending Chloe for bridal essentials which she hadn't even questioned. She looked at the total sum leaving her account every single month. It was enough to bankrupt her if she wasn't careful, yet she had done it willingly. But now, the situation had changed. A relationship is a two-way street. If Mark and Chloe wanted to cut her out of their lives, treating her like an unwanted guest, then they also needed to cut her out of their finances. You can't treat someone like an enemy but expect them to fund your lifestyle. It wasn't just about the money, it was about respect. Linda realized she had been buying their love, or at least, she thought she was contributing to their happiness. Instead, she was just enabling them to treat her poorly. She sat there for a long time, her finger hovering over the cancel automatic payment button. It felt scary. This wasn't just a number on a screen, this was her son's stability. If she stopped paying, they would struggle. Mark would lose his car. They might lose the apartment. Then, she remembered Chloe's smug face in the photos. She remembered the text message, "Chloe is the priority right now." Linda took a deep breath. It was time for Mark to grow up. It was time for Chloe to learn that actions have consequences. If she wasn't the mother, she certainly wasn't going to be the bank. With a sudden surge of determination, Linda clicked the button. One by one, she cancelled the car insurance, the car lease, the rent payments, and the savings fund transfers. She didn't do it to be cruel, she did it to survive. She reclaimed her financial life and, in a way, her dignity. She closed her laptop, the silence in the house no longer feeling suffocating, but peaceful. She stood up and went to the kitchen to make a real dinner for the first time in days. She didn't know what would happen when Mark and Chloe returned from their honeymoon paradise to find their real life in shambles, but for the first time, she knew she would be okay no matter what. She wasn't going to reach out. She was going to wait for them to realize that their free ride was over. The days following the wedding moved with a strange, slow pace for Linda, while the world around her seemed to keep spinning at full speed. The first few days were the hardest. Her house, usually filled with the warmth of anticipation for her son's visits, felt cavernous and cold. She found herself wandering from room to room, picking up items that Mark had left behind, a hoodie on the banister, an old coffee mug on the counter, and placing them in a box. She wasn't packing them away out of anger, but out of a need to reclaim her own space. Every time she looked at the empty spot where Mark used to sit, the memory of the humiliation at the venue washed over her again. But as the week progressed, the sharp sting of betrayal began to dull into a hard, heavy knot of resolve in her stomach. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Mark and Chloe were basking in the luxury of a honeymoon that Linda had paid for. They were staying at an exclusive resort on a white sandy beach, drinking cocktails that cost more than Linda's weekly grocery bill. Chloe spent her days posting photos of her new ring and the ocean view, carefully cropping out any sign of the struggle that had preceded the trip. Her captions were filled with vague quotes about removing toxic people and protecting your peace, which were clearly aimed at Linda. Mark, trying his best to enjoy the trip, would glance at his phone occasionally, feeling a twinge of guilt that he quickly pushed away. Chloe had convinced him that his mother was manipulative and that the dress incident was a deliberate attempt to sabotage her big day. "She just wants attention, Mark," Chloe would say, sipping a drink by the pool. "Let her have her tantrum. We deserve this time." Back at home, Linda was doing more than just packing up old hoodies. She was preparing to dismantle the financial safety net she had spent years building. It wasn't a decision she made lightly. In fact, she spent 2 whole days just staring at her bank statements, going over the numbers until her eyes burned. She saw the automatic transfers she had set up, the car payment, the insurance, the generous allowance she deposited into Mark's account every month, and the hefty check she sent to the landlord for their new apartment. She realized with a jolt that she was working 2 jobs essentially to support a lifestyle where she wasn't respected or wanted. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Linda drove to the bank, a place she had visited hundreds of times, usually with a check in hand to deposit for Mark. This time, she sat down with a personal banker. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out her list of stop payment forms and closure requests. "I need to stop these transfers," Linda said, her voice quiet but firm. "And I need to close the joint account I have with my son." The banker, a kind older woman, looked at Linda with sympathy, having seen this sort of family fallout before. She processed the requests efficiently, handing Linda the receipts. Leaving the bank, Linda felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It was terrifying to think of Mark struggling, but she knew she couldn't fund her own disrespect. If she kept paying, she was telling them that it was okay to treat her like garbage. She drove home and sat at her kitchen table, waiting. It didn't take long for the bubble to burst. By the middle of the second week of the honeymoon, Mark and Chloe were living the high life, completely oblivious to the changes happening back home. They decided to extend their trip by a few days, booking a spontaneous excursion on a private yacht. Mark pulled out the credit card that Linda had paid off for him years ago, the one he used for all his fun expenses. He swiped it with a flourish, expecting the usual approval beep. Instead, the waiter returned with a frowned face. "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined." Mark laughed nervously, thinking it was a machine error. "Try it again." The waiter did. "Declined again." A cold sweat broke out on Mark's forehead. He excused himself and hurried to the bathroom, pulling out his phone to check his banking app. He typed in his password, his heart pounding. When the screen loaded, his stomach dropped. The balance was zero. He frantically switched to the app for their apartment rent. He saw a notification there, payment failed, insufficient funds. He checked the car insurance app, policy cancelled for non-payment. He stood in the stall of the luxury bathroom, his hands shaking, realizing that his mother hadn't just gone quiet, she had gone completely dark. She had cut him off. He rushed back to Chloe by the pool, his face pale. He didn't want to ruin the mood, but he knew he had to tell her. "Chloe, we have a problem," he whispered. "My cards aren't working. And I checked the accounts. Mom stopped everything. The rent, the car, the allowance. It's all gone." Chloe's face instantly darkened. She pulled her sunglasses down and glared at him. "What do you mean? She stopped everything. She can't do that. We have bills." "She can, and she did," Mark stammered, feeling the panic rising. "I have to call her." Mark dialed his mother's number. Back home, Linda was sitting on her porch with a cup of tea. When her phone rang and Mark's name popped up, she didn't feel the usual rush of anxiety. She felt a strange calmness. She let it ring. She let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then, she waited. 10 minutes later, it rang again. She picked it up on the third ring. "Mark," she said, her voice steady. "Mom. What is going on?" Mark's voice was frantic, pitching high with stress. "I just tried to pay for our excursion and my card was declined. I checked the accounts, Mom. Why did you cancel everything? We are still on our honeymoon. How are we supposed to get home? How are we supposed to pay rent?" Linda took a slow sip of her tea. "Hello to you too, Mark. How is the beach?" "Stop it, Mom. This isn't funny. You can't just cut us off like this," Mark shouted. "Chloe is panicking. This is humiliating. You are embarrassing us." Linda tightened her grip on the phone. "Embarrassing, Mark? Like when you had security escort me out of the wedding, like when you texted me that I wasn't welcome because Chloe was the priority, that kind of embarrassing." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Mark hadn't expected her to bring that up. He thought they would just ignore the fight and she would keep being his mother. "Mom, that was in the heat of the moment. We were stressed. You know how Chloe gets. But you can't leave us stranded. We need that money for the apartment. We move in next week. The apartment is paid for until the end of this month, Mark," Linda corrected him, her voice cold. "After that, it's up to you. I cancelled the lease, too. I'm not going to be responsible for a contract I'm not allowed to be part of the family for." "What?" Mark gasped. "You kicked us out." "No, Mark," Linda said softly. "You kicked me out. And when you kick the person paying the bills out of your life, the bills stop coming. It's really quite simple." "Mom, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'll talk to Chloe. We'll come over. We'll fix it. Just turn the money back on. We can't afford this place on our own. You know that." "I know you can't," Linda said. "That's why I was helping you. But help is a two-way street. You can't treat me like an enemy and expect me to act like a benefactor. You need to come home and figure this out like adults. I'm done fixing your messes." "Mom, you're being unreasonable," Mark yelled. "I'm being a mother who respects herself, Linda replied. Enjoy the rest of your trip. I suggest you start looking for cheaper places to live. The car is going to be repossessed soon since the insurance is cancelled, so you'll need to figure that out too. Linda didn't wait for him to respond. She didn't want to hear his excuses or Chloe's screaming in the background. She simply pressed the red button and ended the call. She turned her phone off and set it down on the table. The silence of the house returned, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a fresh start. She knew the storm was coming when they returned, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the rain. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and started making a grocery list for dinner, a dinner she was going to cook just for herself. The plane ride back from the honeymoon was the longest hour and a half of Mark's life. The excitement of returning home as newlyweds had completely evaporated, replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread. He sat squeezed into the economy seat. He and Chloe had been bumped from business class because the ticket couldn't be verified, staring blankly at the back of the seat in front of him. His phone was blowing up with notifications, but none of them were good. Every time he checked his banking app, the numbers remained depressingly low. Chloe sat next to him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, refusing to look out the window or speak to him. She was furious, not at herself, but at the situation she felt they had been unfairly thrown into. When they finally landed and gathered their luggage, the reality of their new situation hit them immediately. Mark pulled out his phone to call an Uber to their new luxury apartment, but he hesitated. The surge pricing was high, and looking at his bank balance, he calculated every cent. "We should take the train," Mark mumbled, hoisting his heavy suitcase over his shoulder. "It's cheaper." Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh that turned heads in the arrivals hall. "Excuse me, we are not taking the train. We are tired, Mark. I just spent 2 weeks planning a wedding and dealing with your mother. Call a car." "Chloe, we have zero money until payday," Mark hissed, feeling the eyes of strangers on them. "Mom cut off the credit cards. I barely have enough cash for the train tickets. We have to be smart now." Chloe stared at him in disbelief, her lip trembling. "This is unbelievable. You're letting her win, you're letting her treat us like this." "Nobody is winning, Chloe. We are broke," Mark snapped, his patience finally snapping. He grabbed her hand and marched her toward the train station, dragging their expensive luggage over the uneven pavement. The ride was crowded and noisy, a stark contrast to the private villa they had just left. They stood squeezed between tired commuters, their honeymoon tan already fading under the harsh fluorescent lights of the subway car. They arrived at the high-end apartment building Mark had been so excited to show Chloe. It was a beautiful modern building with a doorman and a glass lobby. Mark walked up to the front desk with a confident smile, trying to fake it until he made it. "Hi, we're here for Unit 4B. The Hendersons. We just got back from our trip." The doorman typed into the computer, his expression neutral. "I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson. That unit has been vacated." "Vacated?" Mark laughed nervously. "No, we just moved in. The deposit was paid by my mother. There must be a mistake." The doorman looked sympathetic but firm. "There's no mistake, sir. We received notification last week that the lease was terminated by the guarantor. The locks were changed yesterday. Your belongings were moved to a storage facility in the basement, but you have to pay the retrieval fee to get them out." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He turned to look at Chloe, whose mouth had fallen open. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "We have nowhere to go." "Can we at least get our bags?" Mark asked the doorman weakly. The doorman shook his head. You'll have to go to the storage facility around back. But the retrieval fee is $200. $200. Mark checked his wallet. He had 80. They were locked out of their own home before they even spent a night there. They dragged their luggage out of the fancy lobby and walked around to the dirty alleyway where the storage bins were located. They couldn't afford the fee, so they had to leave their honeymoon suitcases in a locker, taking only their backpacks. The next blow came when they went to the parking lot to retrieve Mark's car. Linda had cancelled the insurance, and since Mark hadn't paid the lease payment in months, assuming his mom would cover it, the finance company had tracked the car via GPS. The parking space was empty. Just a patch of oil on the concrete where his shiny SUV used to be. Mark called the tow company, and they confirmed the car had been repossessed that morning. He would have to pay the full loan balance plus fees to get it back. They stood on the sidewalk, the sun setting, tired, hungry, and now carless. "We have to go to my mother's," Chloe said finally, pulling out her phone. "She'll let us stay." "Your mother lives in a 2-bedroom apartment with your 3 brothers, Chloe," Mark said, rubbing his temples. "We can't live there." "So where are we supposed to go?" Chloe screamed, causing a passerby to jump. "Look at us, Mark. We are homeless. This is your fault. You should have handled your mother better. You should have told her to fix the mistake." "My mistake," Mark shouted back, losing his cool. "You kicked her out of the wedding, Chloe. You wore a white dress and told me to choose. I chose you. And now we are paying the price. Did you really think she would keep paying for us after you humiliated her?" Chloe went silent, her face turning red. She didn't have an answer. She just spun around and stomped down the street, expecting Mark to follow. And he did. What choice did he have? They spent the next 3 days searching for a place to live, but their criteria had changed drastically. No more luxury apartments with doormen. They were now looking at basements and attics. Their credit scores weren't great because of the missed payments and the repo, and their combined income wasn't enough to impress landlords any more that Linda wasn't co-signing. Finally, they found a place. It was a damp, dark basement suite on the outskirts of the city, owned by a grumpy landlord who didn't ask too many questions. The windows were tiny and were level with the ankles of people walking by on the sidewalk. The carpet smelled like mildew, and the kitchen was so small you couldn't open the fridge and the oven at the same time. "This is temporary," Mark said as they carried their air mattresses into the room, trying to sound optimistic for Chloe's sake. "Just until we get back on our feet." Chloe sat on the deflated air mattress, looking around the gray walls, and started to cry. "I can't live here, Mark. I'm a wife. I just got married. I'm supposed to be starting a life in a nice home, not a dungeon." "Then we shouldn't have started a war with the person paying for the nice home," Mark said, his voice devoid of emotion. He was tired of fighting, but he was even more tired of pretending Chloe wasn't the reason they were in this mess. The final crack in their marriage happened a week later. Mark had managed to borrow a bike from a neighbor to get to his job at a warehouse. He was exhausted, working double shifts to try and save up for a deposit on a cheap used car. He came home to find Chloe sitting in the dark, scrolling on her phone. She had spent the day posting sad quotes online, fishing for sympathy from her friends, but none of them were offering money. "I talked to my friend Jessica," Chloe said as soon as Mark walked in. "She said you should sue your mom. Emotional distress or something. She can't just cut us off like that." Mark dropped his helmet on the floor. Are you crazy? Sue my mom, she paid for everything for 25 years, Chloe. We are the ones in the wrong. We treated her like trash. I'm not suing her. You're pathetic, Chloe sneered. You're letting her control us. You're weak. You're choosing her over me again. I'm choosing reality over your fantasy. Mark yelled, the sound echoing in the small basement. Open your eyes, Chloe. We live in a basement because of you. We have no car because of you. I have no relationship with my mother because of you. When are you going to take responsibility? Chloe stood up and slapped him across the face. It wasn't a hard slap, but it was the final straw. Mark didn't yell back. He didn't apologize. He just looked at her with cold, dead eyes. He realized then that the love he had for her was being crushed under the weight of her entitlement. They were stuck in this mess together, but they were no longer a team. They were two victims of their own bad choices, trapped in a dark basement, blaming everyone but themselves. Mark turned around and walked out the door, needing air, needing space, and realizing for the first time that he was truly alone in the world he had built. 2 weeks passed before Linda saw her son again. The knock on the door wasn't loud or aggressive, it was hesitant, the kind of knock someone makes when they aren't sure if they are welcome anymore. Linda was in the living room, reading a book she had been meaning to read for years but never had the time for because she was too busy running errands for Mark. When she heard the knock, her heart didn't leap into her throat like it used to. Instead, it beat with a slow, steady rhythm. She wasn't surprised. She knew this day was coming. She set her book down, walked to the door, and opened it. Standing on the porch was Mark, but he looked like a ghost of the person who had left for his honeymoon a month ago. The crisp, expensive suit he wore at the wedding was gone, replaced by a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans that looked a bit too loose. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. He had lost weight, and his posture was slumped, the posture of a man who had the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. He didn't smell like the expensive cologne he used to wear, he smelled like exhaust fumes and stale air. Linda stepped aside without a word, holding the door open. She didn't offer him a hug, and she didn't offer him a smile. She simply waited for him to enter. Mark walked into the hallway and looked around. The house was the same, but it felt different. It was cleaner. The clutter of his teenage years and the chaos of wedding planning were gone. The air smelled like lemon polish and the dinner Linda had just made for herself. They sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Linda had sat while she cut off his financial lifeline. Mark looked at his hands, twisting his fingers together. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound. Finally, Mark looked up, his eyes red and watery. "I came to say I'm sorry," he whispered. His voice cracked, and it was clear he was on the verge of breaking down. Linda watched him closely. "Are you sorry, Mark, or are you just sorry that your life is hard right now?" Mark flinched as if she had slapped him. "It's hard, Mom. It's really hard. We live in a basement. It's damp. I can hear the upstairs neighbors walking all night. Chloe cries herself to sleep. I had to sell my watch just to pay the electric bill. I took the bus here for 2 hours. I don't know how to live like this." Linda leaned forward, her expression softening just a fraction, but her voice remained steel. "I know it's hard, Mark. That's what being an adult is. It's paying bills you can barely afford. It's struggling. I did it for 30 years while I raised you. I worked double shifts. I wore clothes until they fell apart. I skipped meals so you could have braces and play sports. I didn't do it so you could have a luxury life. I did it so you wouldn't have to struggle. But then you decided to struggle anyway. You chose to treat me like an enemy. You chose your pride and Chloe's temper tantrum over your own mother. And now, you have to face the consequences of that choice. It was Chloe, Mark said quickly, shifting the blame. She made me do it. She said if I didn't kick you out, she wouldn't marry me. I was scared of losing her. And now you've lost your home, your car, and your stability, Linda replied calmly. Did you keep her or is she making you happy in that damp basement? Mark looked down at the table. She's miserable. She hates me. She says I'm pathetic for letting you go. Linda let out a long sigh. She reached across the table and covered Mark's hand with hers. It was the first physical contact they had shared in weeks. Mark, listen to me. I love you. You are my son, and I will always love you. That will never change. But I am done being your bank. I am done being your safety net when you treat me like trash. The money is gone forever. I'm not giving you the car back. I'm not paying for a better apartment. That part of our life is over. Mark pulled his hand away and started to cry. Real, gut-wrenching sobs that he had probably been holding in for weeks. But Mom, I can't do it alone. I don't know how. Yes, you can, Linda said, her voice firm and encouraging. You are stronger than you think. You have a job. You have legs to walk. You have a brain. You made a mistake, Mark. A huge one. But you can fix it. It's just going to take time and hard work. And most importantly, you need to learn how to respect people who help you. He wiped his face with his sleeve, looking embarrassed. So, what happens now? Do you hate me? I don't hate you, Linda said. But I don't trust you right now. And I certainly don't trust Chloe. I don't know if I can stay with her, Mark admitted, voicing the fear he had been carrying. She's so angry all the time. She blames you, she blames me, she never takes responsibility. I think I only stayed with her because she made me feel like I needed her. Linda looked at her son, really seeing him as a grown man for the first time, flaws and all. You have to figure that out on your own, Mark. I won't interfere in your marriage. But if you want to be part of my life again, there are rules. I am not an ATM. I am a mother. If we spend time together, it will be because we want to, not because you need money. And if Chloe is around, she needs to apologize. A real apology. Not a sorry you're sensitive apology. She needs to look me in the eye and admit she was wrong. Until that happens, she isn't welcome in my house. Mark nodded slowly. He knew that was fair. He stood up, his legs shaking. I understand. I have a lot of thinking to do. You do, Linda said. She stood up and walked him to the door. And Mark, one more thing. He turned around, hopeful for a second that she might pull out a checkbook after all. The dinner I made is on the stove, she said. Take the leftovers with you. It's just pasta, but it will save you from cooking tonight. Mark looked at the container she held out to him. It wasn't a stack of cash, and it wasn't a car key. It was a container of spaghetti. But looking at it, he realized it was worth more. It was an act of love from a mother who still cared enough to feed him, even if she wouldn't fund him. Thank you, Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Goodbye, Mark. She watched him walk down the driveway, clutching the container of food. He didn't look like the confident groom who had kicked her out weeks ago. He looked like a man starting from zero. As he turned the corner and disappeared from sight, Linda didn't feel sadness. She felt a sense of relief. She went back inside, locked the door, and turned off the porch light. She walked back to the kitchen and washed the single dish she had used. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't a lonely silence anymore. It was peaceful. She picked up her book and sat back down in her armchair. She had done the right thing. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but she knew that sometimes, the best way to love your child is to stop fixing their mistakes and let them learn to stand on their own 2 feet. Linda took a sip of her tea and began to read, finally enjoying her own life, chapter by chapter.